we will, in each session, if you've seen the program, I hope you have a copy of it. We have two full group sessions, one right now and then one after lunch at 1 o'clock. And then three breakout sessions. You can choose two of the three, or if you really like one, you can go to one, same one twice. But that's up to you. But what we do want you to do is please initial your name on the roll going around so you can get credit. And the credit is, of course, the $250 to your research account. And Tricia wanted me to emphasize the fact that this is not money to put in your pocket, but this is money for research. So just to keep that in mind. And also, as you're thinking and planning for teaching and making changes this next year, I hope that you're in contact with your department curriculum representative, whoever that is, or it might be the associate chair in your department. And as you think about ideas to improve your teaching, you really might want to talk with them and see how you can go forward from this point. And then in the dean's office, we'd love to hear from you and your ideas as we go forward. So without further ado, we'd like to turn time over to Joe Price from Economics, who will be moderating our first session, and he can introduce our speakers. So thank you.
So this is a panel that we do every year. It's kind of what we would call our master teacher panel or great teacher panel. And I just wanted to emphasize a couple things, which is that a lot of times we come to these panels and we think, oh, that person teaches big classes, I teach small classes, or that person teaches in history, but I teach in economics. And one of the things I've really appreciated from these panels is that I've learned that great teachers have things that all of us can adopt, and that great teaching actually spans across fields, it spans across class size. And the other thing is that I think there's this kind of myth that like great teachers just are naturally great teachers. And every year I've come to this, I've taken a couple ideas and implemented them in my class. And I've just always been really pleased with what's happened as a result of trying it out. Now, some of those practices I haven't kept in place, either because I'm lazy or they didn't work as well as I thought they would. But many I have, and I think if all you take away each year is one or two new ideas, you will become a master teacher yourself over time. And in fact, in the audience here, we have many master teachers that have served on this panel before. And so I would just encourage you kind of take those into account as we have our panel today. So we have three people with us, and the way we found these is we reached out to each of the department chairs and asked, who are some of the great teachers in your department? And they gave us some great ideas, and these were three that we chose. And so we have Wendy Birmingham from psychology, we have Brigham Franson from economics, and Stuart Anderson from history. And the last thing that I'll say is just to encourage you to find ways to go and sit in on master teachers' classes. I think that they would all love you in their classroom, and I've gotten to sit in on some of Brigham's classes, and I've loved having that experience to see him teach. And we are lucky to have these people here at BYU. And so with that, I'm just going to, I think we'll just have Stuart talk, and then Brigham, and then Wendy, and then after that we'll have a Q&A period.
So I want to talk a little bit about different kinds of students. When I first came to BYU, my goal, I think, maybe almost subconsciously, was to figure out what the BYU student was like. What is the typical BYU student? And then I was going to, in sort of a utilitarian manner, plan the best lessons for the largest number of students, what would benefit the largest number of students. And I think this might have been influenced by the fact that I was never a student at BYU, and it just seemed like this very homogenous place to me. So there must be a lot of students who are very similar. And while that may be in some respects true, I think this is not the case. In recent years, I've thought a lot about how diverse our students actually are. Maybe not so much racially or ethnically diverse. And I don't even necessarily mean diverse in terms of academic abilities, good or bad students. There are just different types of students. So let me show you the types that I've thought of and what they like to learn in the atmosphere, the environments that they prefer, and what maybe we can do to rattle this a little bit, to shake this up. Okay. So the first type of student I would call the self-appointed voice of the classroom. This is an aggressive student, one who likes to talk a lot, constantly raising his or her hand, very enthusiastic, eager to please, and also, I might add, the type of student who does not always take copious notes because they're so interested in engaging in the class. Their favorite learning method is probably a tutorial in your office, which is actually very pleasant and nice until you realize you spent 30 minutes talking with this student and you need to get back to something else, right? But they thrive in all sorts of environments. And they're actually quite a pleasure to have in the class. You want people answering your questions and talking, but they can sort of drown out the other students. One way to manage this, which I've been doing for a long time and I still do, is to simply tell them, let's let somebody else have a turn, right? I think we all do this. But I'm not sure this really always solves the problem, because then the other students, especially the more timid ones, are like, well, she has the answer, let her answer the question, what are you doing? So I think that one approach that I've discovered in helping to resolve this, at least a little bit, is to assign in-class writing assignments before a discussion. Get all of the students to write down their thoughts about something they've all read in common, about a question that's going to be difficult to answer that will require some discussion. And I think this encourages the other students to gather their thoughts, because I think that these know-it-all voice of the class students tend to thrive on spontaneity. It gives the other students a chance to get involved. A second type of student is the hunchbacks of the scriptorium. The students who always bury their head in their notebook and take notes and just don't lift their heads up to ask questions or anything. This is also probably the kind of student, when they're doing their reading at home, will highlight or underline everything and remember very little of what they've actually highlighted. These students probably thrive most on PowerPoint-heavy lectures where it's a sort of monologue by the professor telling the students everything they need to know that they think they need to know for the exam. I think the best way to shake these students out of this comfort zone and get them really truly engaging in the class, and it's better for the health of the class in general, is to encourage project-based learning, to either in the syllabus ahead of time or even with some spontaneity in your class, force them out of their books, force them out of their notes, and get them to try to do a hands-on approach. A third type, see if we can change, is the timid introvert. The kind of student who never wants to talk, and you don't necessarily even always want to sort of force them to talk. This may be counterproductive in some ways, but they're terrified of public speaking. They don't necessarily sit in the front or the back of the room, I've noticed, although they might. They sit on the corners of the room, on the outside, and don't want to be seen by you. I think these students probably would prefer it if the professor made him or herself the center of attention all the time, gave a very theatrical lecture where they don't feel any need to engage. They don't feel that compulsion to discuss. Instead, I think, and when you have a class discussion, other types of students tend to dominate the discussion. This student will still not speak. I think the way to break this is to have small group discussions. Quick discussions, but very small group, maybe 2 or 3 or 4 people, probably 3 or 4, where the student can feel a little more comfortable speaking, and then perhaps you can get the students who are more timid to take that knowledge, that sort of confidence they've gained from speaking in a smaller group and share it with the whole classroom. Finally, and there are lots of categories. These are just the 4 that I've thought of today. The socially awkward extrovert, the student who's constantly making sort of semi-inappropriate comments, speaking out of turn, asking non sequitur questions, just does not sort of grasp classroom etiquette very well. And I think this student probably thrives best in a class of about 10 to 12 people, where it's not so large that they don't feel like they need to say anything, but it's not so small. They want to voice their strange opinions. And I think we've all experienced this in graduate school with the seminar that we've all had, and there's always that one student with off-the-wall, kind of bizarre ideas. This sort of student, though, I think would probably benefit most from the idea of an inverted classroom, where you have the students prepare the teaching material for the day. Because I think that a lot of the awkwardness and the trouble that disrupts the flow of it is that they're not used to classroom etiquette. They haven't grasped this nature of the conversation in class. This puts them in a different position and forces them to reconsider their sort of role in the classroom. So to sum up very briefly, I think that what I've learned in thinking about these different types of students is that, first of all, we need to map out our syllabus ahead of time, anticipating that there will be different types of students. Don't just stick with one pedagogical technique. This is difficult in large classes, obviously. It's almost impossible to do much else. But there are some ways, even in very large classrooms, to break up the monotony, to not allow a rut to form in the class. And then secondly, if you see a rut forming, then alter your syllabus. Be prepared to employ some of these techniques based on what kinds of students you see and how they're disrupting the flow of the classroom and how you'd like it to go. So.
I teach econometrics. Econometrics is the math and statistics theory behind data analysis in economics. And so it's pretty heavy math and it's very technical material. And my classes are usually between 30 and 40 students, just to give you an idea of the sorts of classrooms that I'm usually in. So I have 3 or maybe 3.5 tips that I try to follow that have worked for me. The first one is kind of motivated by the old story that everybody knows about, was it Socrates or maybe somebody else? Somebody went to Socrates and said, I want to learn, and you know the story. He took him down to the water, to the sea, and then held him underwater until he was, gasping and struggling for air. Then he let him come up, and he said, when you were under the water, what did you want more than anything? And whoever it was said, I wanted air. And Socrates said, when you want knowledge as much as you wanted air, then I'll teach you. What I've found is that students will learn if they feel that they need to know what you have to teach them. They will learn econometrics when they understand that they need to know econometrics in order to live a full and happy life. So that's my that's sort of one of my tips, which is before we do anything, I want my students to understand what are the questions that can be answered, what are the problems that they can solve using the tools that we're going to learn in econometrics. Once they understand that, then they're ready to receive what I have. The second kind of sub-part of this tip is to make sure that the students can see the forest. There are a lot of trees in econometrics. I just realized last night, there are literally the letters TREES in econometrics. There's a lot of trees, it's easy to get buried, so I've noticed that students learn a lot better when they have even a visual, like literally a visual overall representation of what we're going to be doing in the course. So for example, in my econometrics 588 class, the whole course is structured around a tree, a family tree. All of the different frameworks that we talk about can be put on this genealogy family tree. There's aunts and uncles and cousins and parents and siblings that kind of connect all the things that we learn about. When students have a visual place to put the knowledge that they're learning, I think they synthesize it a lot better and they learn it a lot better. There's probably psychologists who can, I'm sure there's a cognitive theory behind that. So that's the first thing. Make sure that students see the forest and understand that they need the forest. The second tip is the maxim, never do for students that which they can do for themselves. I try to follow this in my classroom. So for example, I never supply a single formula, a single word, a single anything that the students should already know, either from the reading or from a previous lecture. Part of every lecture involves reviewing stuff from the past. If they've already heard it and learned it, I don't write it on the board myself. I wait for the class to tell me what it is. If we've done a similar derivation in class, instead of me doing it again on the whiteboard, I'll have volunteer students come up and grab the dry erase marker and do it on the board themselves. There's probably ways that I can do this even more. There's probably a zillion ways I could do this in the classroom, but I try to never do for students what they could do for themselves. The third tip is to obey the speed limit. The speed limit of the cognitive speed limit, the speed limit of understanding, which is way slower than you think it is. It takes much longer for concepts to be absorbed and taken up than I think we realize. To force myself to obey the speed limit, I don't use PowerPoint. Instead, I do everything by hand. dry erase marker on the dry erase board. This forces me to go through math in real time. The students can kind of watch me or watch a student or follow along solving an equation the way they would solve an equation. Having to write things out forces me to go at the speed of understanding. The fourth thing, this is sort of like a half a tip. This is something that I learned that didn't work. So at least it doesn't work for all students. I appreciate Stuart's comments on there are different kinds of students. So one thing that the kind of teacher I thought I was going to be was the teacher who keeps everyone on their toes by randomly, well, first of all, by learning everyone's name, and then cold calling them at random to supply an answer. I did that for the first couple of semesters. I actually had a professor like that in grad school, and it kept me on my toes. It kept me engaged. I found that there are more students than I thought for whom this was really, really stressful and even was an obstacle to them coming to class. They became so anxious at the possibility of doing this that they wouldn't come to class. I'm really glad that one of these students came to my office and let me know that this was an obstacle. And so I stopped doing that. Instead, I had to kind of find other ways to make sure everyone gets involved. I think some of Stuart's tips were good there. So that's sort of a negative tip, something that I learned didn't work so well for many of my students. So that's what I have. Forest for the trees, don't do for students what they can do for themselves, obey the speed limit, and no more cold calling. That probably doesn't work.
Okay, I cannot lecture without standing up, so I'm sorry, but I have to stand up. I think one of the first things about teaching is, I will just start this off by telling you, I love to talk. I love to talk. Like, I could talk all day. My husband will tell you, I talk all the time. I think they get sick of it at home. I'm always like, hey, I gotta tell you this. So I love talking, and I think that's one of the things that can help us be good teachers if we love to talk. I get asked to talk in sacrament meeting, and I'm one of those people who's like, yes! Because the greatest thing to me is an entire audience of people who just have to sit there, right? And I get to talk. So I love to talk. That's one of the things I do. So I love to teach, and I love to talk. So that's one of the things I do. I use a discussion-based, I'll tell you this too. I don't stand behind the podium. I keep my notes here, but I don't use them. I'll stand, in fact, in front of the podium and talk to the students. And if I need to look at my notes, I will, and then I go right back out to the front of the podium. And I think that makes students feel more like you're interacting with them rather than lecturing to them. I do use a discussion-based style in my class. I think that so this is how I do. I tell the students, I'll give them some kind of concept, and then I'm like, what do you guys think about that? Do you believe that? How is that? Have you ever seen this in your life? And students, I think in the beginning won't talk, but then they start, and we always do end up with one of those who always has an opinion, right? Always. And I will tell you how I handle that is I did have a student last time who did that, and I just took him out in the hall after class and I said, I love you and I love your comments, but I'm really worried that other kids in the class are not being able to talk. So if I don't call on you, I don't want you to think that I'm ignoring you. I just want other people to talk. So that's one thing I do. I feel like that when the class is participating in the entire course of the contact, they're more invested in what's happening. As they get to participate and as they get to say, here's what I think, here's my opinion, I just feel like they're more invested in the class, and I think they're more invested in the content of the class, and they're more interested in learning what's being presented to them in class. I do also like to give them real life examples. That's probably one of my biggest things is I always take the concept and think, how can I give them an example of this in real life? So for instance, in social psychology, I'm teaching about attitudes, and we think that attitudes, are what lead to behavior. I feel this way, and so therefore I act this way. And one of the concepts is that actually behavior can lead to attitudes. And so they sort of don't get that sometimes. And so one of the examples I give them is we're asked to serve other people in the church. We're constantly asked. So when you bring meals to people, and you don't really have any investment in those people, but you serve them, don't you grow to love them? And so here we're acting, there's our behavior, we're bringing meals, we're doing things for people, and then the attitude comes afterwards. I love those people. So that's I try to give them real life examples, and it helps them to understand. I always do give this little spiel before class, on the first day of class, which is that we will talk about a lot of things, and there will be people in here that don't agree with you, but we will always be respectful to those people that we don't agree with. And I have to do that because I teach gender, and that can get quite controversial, and people will say things that other people will find incredibly offensive, right? And so I have to be careful with that. I do try to learn everyone's names, so on the name thing. I really do try to learn everybody's names. It's a little bit more difficult in a class that's 60 or 70 students. A couple of semesters ago, I had 120 students in that class, and there was just no possible way. But if I have 40 students or 30 students in my class, I do really try to learn their names. You know the flashcards? You can do the flashcards. I do the flashcards all the time. And then the other thing I do is print out the color pictures of everybody's names, and I just sort of look over it, but I do actually tell them on the first day, I'm gonna learn your names, but if you don't look like this anymore, and you're not wearing the same outfit, it might take me a little while. You know, wear the same outfit, I'll learn your name. I do tell them that, but I really do try to, and the reason I try to learn their names so much is because then when I call on them, I can say, Sam, you know, when he raises his hand, Sam, you know, Adam, Mary. And I can call on them, and it's, even in my evals, I have students who say, oh my gosh, she knew my name. And they're surprised that their professor knew their name. So I really think learning their names is an important thing. One of the things I do too is take that roll with me to class, the color roll, and I will pinpoint somebody. So I'm looking at Rebecca right there, and I can't remember her name, so I'll look her up on the roll, and I keep just like going, okay, Rebecca, Rebecca, Rebecca. And then as soon as she raises her hand, I'm like, Rebecca, right? So I pinpoint people and then work on learning their names, and that seems to be a little bit easier. Well, going back to gender and women's studies is the other class that I teach, which is very controversial. And I really try to stay neutral, but I'm going to be honest, it doesn't always happen, you know, because I have my opinions. So it's really difficult to kind of keep that in check and listen to what people are saying. And I can give you an example of trying to be neutral, but not always making everybody happy. And we're not going to make everybody happy. The other thing, actually, I just want to say in class is I'm constantly moving. I'm constantly moving. I walk over here to talk to Bruce, and then I walk over here, and if you're not paying attention to me, then I walk over here, you know, and stand in front. I walk up and down the aisles. I'm a big walker. But one thing I wanted to say, and we just don't always, in these classes, these sort of controversial classes, everybody's not going to like you. So in my evals that just came in, I'll just tell you, I had one that, oh my gosh, this kid ripped me apart. I'm like, she's the worst thing that ever happened to BYU, and I can't even believe, you know, that they let her teach, and this whole thing. It went on for like this long, right, about what a terrible teacher was. Luckily, the very first sentence that this kid put in was, after the second week, I never attended class, because I hate her so much, right? So, luckily, he never attended class. So I can use that when I, you know, go into my tenure review. Well, he hates me, but he never went to class. So, but the nice thing is that a couple of weeks later, after I read that evaluation, and I'm such a ruminator that I just ruminated on that, you know, for like 2 weeks. Like, oh my gosh, this kid hates me. And then the next day, or a couple of days later, in my box right outside my door was this nice little note, which I'm just going to tell you what it said. I believe one of the most this is from a different student, clearly not the same student, right? I believe that one of the most profound spiritual experiences happened during your gender psychology course. The way you approach gender issues helped me understand perspectives I had not understood or considered before, and see those I disagreed with from a more Christ-like lens. Okay, that makes it all worth it, right? So then I can like not remember the kid who hates me, and every time I think about the kid who hates me, then I reread this because it makes me happy again. Right, so we have to, I mean, you know, evals, we just, You never know what you're going to get. Okay, now here's the best thing I ever heard, and it was the other day at our faculty retreat. One of our faculty members, one of our new faculty members, and I'll give her credit, Diane Tice said this. She said, "We treat our students too often as consumers and not as products that we are producing." Okay, I loved that. Because the idea is if we treat our students as consumers, then what we're trying to do is teach to what they want, which is an A, right? And so in business, if we were in business, we will adapt our product to what the consumer wants. So if he wants an A, then we have to adapt, right? So that our students are happy. They're getting what they want. But we have to stop thinking of them as consumers and think of them as products. What are we trying to produce? We're trying to produce the best possible adults we can who go out into the world and make a difference. And then we don't teach to what they want, we teach to what they can become. And so once we accept the idea that our students are not our consumers, but they are the products that we are producing, then I think we can be better teachers.
Hi, thank you for all of your comments. I am really interested in how you deal with offensive, things that are offensive to other students. Because there are those, maybe you disagree about how to interpret a document. I just came from class, we had different comments. But when it's offensive to other students, how do you handle that as a teacher in any point of view? Answer that one.
Well, mine are the worst, right? So I get an awful lot of, I get comments that are offensive to other students. I acknowledge that that their opinion matters. And that's pretty much, at the beginning of class, we talk about the fact that people will say something that you don't agree with and that you may vehemently not agree with. But we're always respectful in this class, and that our class is a safe place and you can voice your opinion. And I do get offensive opinions. I let them speak. I think everybody's entitled to their opinion.
Brigham probably doesn't get offensive comments. I don't know what you're going after. Maybe grab a little. Maybe you guys can pass it.
We got this one here.
Oh,
Well, this one's out here. Over out there.
You have to maybe use that one.
I'm not sure I have anything really that insightful to say. I feel the same way that I allow pretty much any comment. I've never had a situation where I really feel like they've gone beyond the pale. I can imagine such a situation, and it scares me because I'm not sure I'm prepared for that. I have to think about that. But you sort of acknowledge their opinion and you move on, I think, rather than dwelling on the controversy per se. You let I guess it depends on the situation, right, Leslie? I don't know. It's tricky.
I just wanted to follow up on that a little bit, and I'm curious if you guys have ideas of ways, at the beginning of the semester or in the syllabus, or how you frame your course to avoid situations, because I do think there is a difference between an opinion that you strongly disagree with and an opinion that offends you. And I sincerely do not believe that we have to have a classroom setting where offensive things are said. Like, all opinions can be said in respectful ways that other people will really dislike, but they don't have to be offended by. So how can we create an atmosphere where people can voice very strong opinions that the entire class will disagree with, but that won't offend people? I think there's ways to be respectful in how we voice opinions, and I want to know how can we create that kind of atmosphere, if that makes sense.
I'm the one who gets all of those. Well, first off, I haven't had anything that's really offensive, but I have had things that I disagree with and students in the class will disagree with. And because I've established that at the very beginning of the class that we will always be respectful, and even if you disagree with something somebody says, you have to be respectful of their opinion. And so I do let other students comment on anything that somebody says, but again, they have to be respectful. But honestly, I've never had anything in class that's been straight out offensive.
I wondered if we could just say, you know, as you have stated right at the first of class, at the very first of the semester, everyone has a right to their opinion, and could it be vocally given without deriding comments. But when that happens, and sometimes it does, and the whole class is taken aback, we go, as a professor, I go, could a lot of times, and I don't know if this is good, so you tell me if it's bad, I will say, interesting. Anyone like to disagree or agree?
Yeah.
And then it takes it off me for a minute till I can put my head back together and my heart.
Yeah.
Is that?
Yeah, that's
Nuts?
basically how I handle anything that seems to like freak the class out. Because there are things that people will say that you can see that the class is sort of freaked out.
But
by
someone
that.
else will take it.
Mm-hmm.
No, it's okay. So thinking about this a little more too, I think that maybe the best way, and this is what Brendan was getting at, and how maybe I can't remember who it was, how you frame your class, how you set your class up. I think that it's probably pretty critical to establish a classroom atmosphere where people aren't just tossing their opinions around or feel comfortable just sort of throwing those around. Because we don't have philosophy in our college, and that's the only discipline I can really imagine this sort of flying most of the time. When people start just sort of baldly stating their opinions, it's kind of like my socially awkward student, you know, that feels a little out of place. So if you sort of set the ground rules, not necessarily explicitly in the syllabus, like outline in some big detail, here's what we're going to do, here's how we're going to avoid this problem, just sort of set the tone at the beginning of class, that this is all about, these are academic questions, and thus we're not going to get involved in these super strong opinions. I don't know.
Can you? Okay, one thing that I have put in my syllabus and that as a mantra that I live by to create a safe space is I say that our purpose as sociologists is to understand, explain, and predict, not to blame and not to condemn. And if I feel that there's a blaming or condemning going on, I step back and I say, okay, what's behind this? What's understanding this? What is the underlying principle and assumption behind these beliefs? And I just step back from that. That's how I handle it.
I find that the students often want to know what I think when this kind of stuff happens.
Yeah.
And so I think just to leave it as, well, that's interesting, and then move on, I think it does a disservice to the students. I mean, hypothetically, we're the experts on these issues, and so when there's an opinion that isn't based in fact or is analytically incorrect, I think we can be sensitive at the same time that we correct. And so what I try to do is present some evidence or some data, and in my discipline that's partly what we do, so it's not an awkward or weird kind of a thing to do. But also say, there's often data on both sides of these issues, and so acknowledge that, and that there likely are data points on both sides, but then state what I feel, and I try to be clear that that my purpose is not that they don't have to learn my opinion for the exam or anything, but they do need to understand the data.
Okay, this is related to the speed limit idea that Brigham brought up. Seems like students have different speed limits, and so can you give some tips about how do you deal with the bright students challenging the bright ones, but not overwhelming students who maybe just have a little bit of a slower time versus cognitive?
I think that's one of the hardest challenges in any classroom setting. This was one of Stuart's points. There are different students who learn at different speeds. And I think, like Wendy said, you're not going to make everybody happy. What do? I tried to teach as Christ taught. He didn't teach econometrics, but there are ways that I can teach on more than one level. I can teach in a way where I point out, here are the basic fundamentals that we're doing, and so the students who take longer, who have a harder time with the math, they will at least get that, while kind of simultaneously also filling in more technical details for the students who are quicker and can do it. It's hard, it's a balancing act, but I guess what I try to do is teach so that just about all students will be able to kind of stay on the wagon by periodically, every couple of minutes, reminding everyone these are the very basic points, but at the same time also going through the harder stuff so that the students who are faster won't be bored and will get their money's worth out of they're not consumers, so that they will continue to be challenged and engaged. So I do try to teach on kind of these two levels simultaneously.
I have a quick question. I find it very easy to fall into the trap of the student as consumer comment that you were mentioning. And in my mind, I understand that I want them to become these products. I'd be curious to hear how you convince them that they aren't consumers.
Well, that is the trick. I mean, that is the trick, because I think they think they're consumers, and they certainly often treat their professors as if that's what they want. I had a couple of students who sort of gave that vibe that I want to go to grad school, and the only thing that's standing between me and my 4.0 is you, right? So I think that I don't know. I mean, I honestly don't know. I think it's our mindset that has to change, and then as our mindset changes, then we're able to teach them without, I'm constantly thinking about the evals. I wish I couldn't. I wish I couldn't. But I think as we are constantly thinking about the evals, then that's when we start teaching as if they're the consumer. So I don't know how we get the kids to change, but I think that as our attitude changes, then hopefully, they'll start to understand.
Okay, so one way to think about this question of consumer versus product is I find that I'm my most effective as a teacher when I'm teaching my students how to acquire new knowledge, right? So and rather than products, I try to treat them as producers, right? So you can, especially in today's world, right? Finding out what someone already knows isn't that hard. Finding out what nobody knows, that's really hard, right? And that's maybe the one skill I have in my whole life, right? It's the one thing I can do. And so that I think they find exciting, right? And it's hard to do that in introductory classes, although I think we can do more there than we think we can. But in all my other classes, that's my focus, is that you need to learn how to acquire knowledge that no one else has yet. That is what's going to distinguish you in the knowledge economy, right? That is what's going to make you different, right? And that's, and we're professors, we're researchers, that's what we do. That's what we can teach them to do. So I think that helps a lot, actually. And I think they buy into that. But I may not work in all conditions.
Yeah, I think that just really quickly in response, I think there's something to be said for actually talking about those course objectives we all put at the beginning of our syllabus about learning skills and what are you going to get out of this class besides just learning about econometrics and how to do the numbers. It's something broader than that and bigger than that, and we need to have that conversation with our students so that they come to see, even if they continue to see themselves as consumers, because they are paying money to go here in some limited way, this makes sense, to see them as consumers as buying these skills rather than buying that grade.
That's really related to what I was going to say. So I frequently will remind my students, and so sometimes I take a poll at the beginning of class, and some of my classes, a high percentage of them are planning on going to grad school. And so I'll remind them, when you're in grad school, somebody's going to ask you to So I frequently remind them, this is a skill, I'm teaching you a skill right now that you can generalize to your career or your or to grad school. I think that helps a little bit.
One more question, and then I think the last question.
It's not a question, so let somebody have a
Okay,
question.
so is there one last question? Question for Pat. Okay, so I have a final question that I need some advice on. And I'm just curious how you guys effectively use office hours as a way to promote student learning, and I would just love to hear your tips on how to use office hours as a part of kind of what we do.
I'm really bad at it because I don't have established office hours, and so I just tell them to email me. And I'm one of those people that lets my students come in and then I spend a half an hour sitting with them, right? And so I do spend a lot of time. But I find that the truth is, if I spend a half an hour with a student, even if it's not explaining concepts, it's just letting them talk about whatever they're concerned about. I don't know. I want to have a rapport with my students. I want them to feel comfortable with me. I want them to be able to feel like they can come and just talk to me. So I'm really bad at that. I let them come. So I don't productively use my office hours. I just let them come.
So I will try to keep tabs on what students are really struggling. I can get that. We have quizzes every other lecture usually, so I can kind of see more frequently than the midterm schedule who's struggling. And so I'll invite specific students to my office hours to help them find out what more they can do. Why are they not getting what they should be getting out of the class? So I'll kind of use it to address Jocelyn's question about how do you teach at different speeds. I can teach slower in office hours than I can somewhere else. So that's one way that I use it.
I'm not sure I have any great insights here either. I'm kind of like Wendy. I let students come whenever they want and talk with me, and I'm pretty open about this. But maybe your question could be slightly rephrased, like how do we most efficiently use our office hours so that we're not cutting into our research? Because that's pretty darn important. And some of my classes, some semesters, I have students, like a parade of students every day in my office. So I have to turn my light out and pretend I'm not there, Other semesters, half the students or more won't know where my office is or even where in the building it is at all. I mean, they have no idea where the history department is. So I think it kind of depends. But one thing that I found useful, at least for the smaller classes that I teach, is to have sign-up sheets for particular assignments so they can discuss a particular assignment. Because if I just say, stop by my office, have any questions, half of them won't do it. They won't think about doing it. If there's something particular coming up, and I encourage them in conjunction with that assignment or that topic to come and make them sign up, even if I don't make it part of their grade or anything like that, they'll sign up and they'll come and it'll be a fruitful discussion. It'll be limited to that topic so I can cycle through them quickly.